My name is Dorothy Callahan. I am 72 years old, and I founded the company that bears my last name 35 years ago, when I was 37, with a second mortgage on this house and a notebook I bought at the drugstore for 99 cents. That notebook had a black cover. I still have it. It sits on the kitchen table every single morning, right next to my coffee cup, because some habits become part of who you are before you even notice. 3 weeks before my surgery, my son Rick decided he was going to sell my company for $2 million. He chose the morning of my operation to close the deal. He did not tell me. He assumed I would be unconscious. I want you to picture him that morning. 51-inch chest, good haircut, the kind of sport coat that says, "I belong in a boardroom," even when you have not earned it yet. He had a smile I used to think was charming. I raised that smile. I know every variation of it, and I know what it looks like when it is not for me, but at me. He said to me once, about 2 months before all of this, "Mom, you're not in a position to make big decisions anymore." He said it the way you say something you have rehearsed in the car. What he did not know is that 6 weeks before he said it, I had already been to see Walter Pruitt, my attorney. Walter has handled my paperwork since before Rick had a driver's license. I had gone in to update a few things. Routine, I told myself. But the truth is, I had been watching my son the way a farmer watches the sky when the clouds come in wrong. $2 million. Gone in 11 minutes. Stay with me, and I will tell you exactly how it happened. I was born in Dayton, Ohio, and I have never left, which surprises people sometimes, as if staying somewhere on purpose is a thing that needs explaining. My mother cleaned houses. My father worked the line at a plant that does not exist anymore. They were not people who talked about legacy. They were people who showed up. I showed up too. I started Callahan Business Services in 1989, which means the business is older than several of the people who work for me now. We do payroll, bookkeeping, HR compliance, tax preparation for small and mid-sized companies in the Dayton area. Nothing glamorous. Exactly the kind of work that keeps other people's businesses from falling apart. I knew from the beginning that if I did it right and did it honestly, the phone would not stop ringing. I was correct. For 30 years, I was the sole director and sole owner. The articles of organization filed with the Ohio Secretary of State have one name on them. Mine. Callahan Business Services, LLC. The sign above the door on North Main has been repainted twice. My name has been on it both times. Rick joined the company 12 years ago. I gave him a management title because he needed structure, and because, God help me, I wanted him close. He had a good head for operations. He knew how to talk to clients. I thought we were building something together. What I did not understand then is that there is a difference between a person who wants to build and a person who wants to inherit. He had no ownership stake, no equity, no authority to sign contracts above a certain dollar threshold, and absolutely no legal power to alienate company assets. That was not an oversight. That was a decision I made with Walter at the very beginning, and one I revisited quietly every few years. Rick began asking questions about the financials around 18 months ago. What was the revenue? What were the liabilities? What was the company worth in today's market? I answered him. I was his mother, and I ran a transparent shop. But I noticed the questions. I noticed that they were not the questions of someone who wants to learn. They were the questions of someone who is calculating. My black notebook was on the table the morning he first asked. It has been on that table so long that I do not see it anymore until I need it, the way you stop seeing the clock on the wall until someone asks you what time it is. I opened it and wrote down the date and 3 words after he left. Calculating, not curious. Then came the Sunday dinner. It was a cold night in February. The roads had that dry, frozen look they get in Ohio in winter, and the house smelled like the casserole Diane had made, something that involved a lot of cream and not enough salt, which I ate without comment because I was raised right and because I was watching. Rick waited until after the plates were cleared. He leaned back in his chair in the way that men do, when they want to appear relaxed but are actually very tense. He said he had been thinking about the future. He said the business landscape was changing. He said some things about market conditions that he had clearly read somewhere and not quite digested. And then he said it. "Mom, you're not in a position to make big decisions anymore." The first time he said it, 2 weeks before that dinner, I had let it pass. I had been tired and I did not want a scene at the kitchen table. But this was the second time, and he said it with Diane nodding slowly beside him, and he slid a folder across the table with some papers inside that he wanted me to sign. Something about reorganizing management authority. Something about delegating operational control. I looked at the folder. I did not open it. I said, "Thank you, Rick. I'll have Walter take a look." He said Walter was retired. Walter is not retired. Walter has been to 3 of my grandchildren's birthday parties, and we have lunch at Milano's every other month. But I did not correct him. I just smiled and refilled my coffee. He wasn't suggesting I sign those papers. He was rehearsing the moment when I would have no choice. 2 weeks after that dinner, I went to see Walter. I told him what was happening. He pulled up the articles of organization, the operating agreement, everything. He said what I already knew. The company was 100% mine. Rick's title gave him authority to manage day-to-day operations, to sign vendor agreements under $10,000, to represent the company at routine meetings. It gave him precisely zero authority to sell or transfer any asset of the company. Zero. Walter updated the documents anyway, made everything airtight, made sure that if anyone ever tried to present Rick as having authority he did not have, the paperwork would be unambiguous. We filed the updated records with the Secretary of State. I went home. I made coffee. I wrote in the black notebook, "Everything is in order." That was 6 weeks before Rick decided to sell the company for $2 million. I found out because I still have access to the corporate email system. Rick had set it up years ago and never thought to remove my credentials, because in his mind, I was already the past tense of myself, a woman who had handed off the real work and was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up with the reality he had decided on. There was an email thread from a private equity group out of Columbus. 3 weeks of back and forth. A letter of intent, a proposed closing date. The proposed closing date was the same day as my surgery. I had been scheduled for a procedure on my hip for several months. Not emergency surgery, but not trivial either. The kind of thing where they put you under general anesthesia and you wake up in recovery not entirely sure what year it is. Rick knew about the surgery. He had known for 2 months. I sat at the kitchen table with my black notebook open, and I wrote down the number, $2 million. Then I wrote, closing date, day of surgery. Then I wrote, he did not schedule that by accident. Rick was listed in the correspondence as authorized representative of Callahan Business Services. He was not. He had sent the buyers a document that looked official and was not. I do not know if he understood that what he was attempting was fraudulent, or if he simply believed so completely that the company would eventually be his that the legalities felt like a formality. Either way, I did not call him. I did not confront him. I wrote down everything I knew, closed the notebook, and waited. The night before the surgery, Rick called me at 8:30. His voice was warm. He said he would be there at 7:30 in the morning, before I went in. He said he loved me. He said not to worry about anything. I told him to get some rest. At 9:47 that night, he called again, but the call connected by accident. He did not know I could hear him. He was talking to Diane. He said, "The surgery will take about 4 hours. I'll close the deal, get there for the end." Diane laughed. 9:47 p.m. I remember the time exactly because I wrote it in the notebook while I was still on the phone, not moving, barely breathing. He knew how many hours he needed to sign. He did not know how many hours the surgery would actually take. He assumed 4. He was wrong about that too. I did not sleep well that night. Not because I was frightened about the surgery. I have faced harder things than a hip replacement in my 72 years. I did not sleep well because I was doing arithmetic in my head, and arithmetic keeps you awake. The morning of the surgery, I was at the hospital by 6:15. The pre-op nurse was a young woman named Ashley, who had very cheerful scrubs and very cold hands. I liked her immediately. Megan, my granddaughter, was there before I was. She had driven 40 minutes from her apartment in Yellow Springs, and she was in the waiting room with 2 coffees and a crossword puzzle when I walked in, which is exactly the kind of person she is. At 7:28, I was on the gurney in the pre-op bay. The anesthesiologist had been in to introduce himself, the IV was in, the room smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. The chair beside me was empty. Rick had said 7:30. It was 7:28. 2 minutes, I thought. He might still come. And then I thought about 9:47 p.m., and I thought about the closing date, and I thought about Diane laughing, and I understood that the chair was going to stay empty. Megan held my hand. She did not say anything about her father. She did not need to. She just held my hand and told me she would be there when I woke up. And she was. Do you think a person could really leave their own mother to go into surgery alone for $2 million? I am not asking rhetorically. I want you to think about it. Comment below and tell me if you have ever had someone treat you like a problem that was about to go away. I will be reading every single one. I woke up in recovery at 12:40 in the afternoon. The surgery had taken a little over 4 hours, which meant Rick had probably been sitting across from that investment group about the time they were closing my incision. My first clear thought was, Walter. I asked the nurse for my phone. She looked uncertain, because you are not supposed to make calls in recovery, but I was a 72-year-old woman who had just had surgery, and I had a certain look on my face that I have been told is not easy to argue with. She handed me the phone. I called Walter Pruitt. I said, Walter, Rick does not have the authority to execute this sale. I need you to know that. Walter said, I know, Dorothy. The articles are clear. I said, I need you to attend their closing meeting. Not to intervene, just as an observer. You don't need to do anything. Just be there. There was a pause. Walter has known me for a long time. He understood what I was asking. He said, I'll be there. I said, thank you. And Walter, bring the updated filings. I set the phone down on the blanket across my lap. The recovery room had a window that looked out onto a gray Ohio sky, the color of old concrete, the color I have been looking at my entire life. Dayton in March. You either make peace with that sky or you leave, and I have always made peace with it. I have built things under it. I was not afraid of anything that was happening outside that window. Have you ever had that moment when you realized you had exactly what you needed, but chose to wait for the right time to use it? I had that moment in a hospital recovery room, with an IV in my arm and my hip wrapped in surgical dressing. It was the calmest I had felt in months. Rick appeared at the hospital at 3:23 in the afternoon. I know the time because Megan told me later, and because I have the habit, ingrained over 35 years of running a business, of noting when people arrive. 3:23. The surgery had ended before noon. He had been gone for more than 7 hours. He came in with flowers, carnations, which he knows I do not particularly like, but which are what you buy when you stop at a hospital gift shop on your way up from the parking garage. He said he was so sorry he was late. He said he had a meeting he simply could not cancel. He said he hoped everything had gone smoothly. I looked at him. He looked back at me with an expression I recognized. It was the expression of someone who believes the hard part is over. The expression of someone who has done the thing and is now just waiting for the consequences to arrange themselves in his favor. I said, "That's all right, son. I'm right here." I smiled at him the way I smile when I am doing arithmetic that the other person cannot see. He looked at me the way you look at a problem that is about to go away. I looked at him the way you look at one you have just solved. He stayed for 40 minutes. He talked about nothing in particular. He asked how the pain was. He mentioned something about a business development meeting he was excited about. He did not mention Columbus. He did not mention $2 million. He kissed my forehead when he left and said he would call tomorrow. I opened the black notebook when he was gone. I wrote 3:23, 7 hours, carnations. I was discharged 5 days later. Megan drove me home. 1 week after that, I went into the office. Rick had not expected me. Nobody had told him I was coming because I had not told anyone except Carol, who has been my executive assistant for 18 years, and who I would trust with the combination to any safe I own. Carol had Tyler, her son, when she was 26, which means he's 14 now, and apparently a very good baseball player, which I know because I ask. I drove myself, which the physical therapist had cautioned me against, and which I did anyway, because I had been driving myself to that office since 1989, and I was not about to stop now. I pulled into the parking lot on North Main and sat in the car for a moment. I looked at the sign above the door, Callahan Business Services. The letters were the same dark green they had been since the second repainting, 12 years ago. My name, still there. I walked in the front door with my cane, and the lobby went quiet for a moment, in the way that lobbies do when someone unexpected arrives. And then people started to stand up. Not because I had told them to, just because. Carol came around the desk and said, "Mrs. Callahan, we've missed you." I said, "I've missed you too, Carol. How is Tyler?" She lit up the way she always does when someone asks about him. I was home. Rick found out I had been to the office later that day. He called that evening. His voice had a different quality to it. Not warm anymore. Something more careful. He said it was good that I was feeling well enough to visit. He said the word visit, which told me everything about where he thought I belonged. I did not correct him. I was not finished yet. The closing meeting was set for 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after I had come home from the hospital. The investment group had flown up from Columbus. They brought 2 attorneys and a junior associate and a deal memo that was very nicely formatted. Rick had reserved the large conference room on the second floor of my building. My building. I was in the parking lot at 10:55. I knew the layout of that building better than the people who had been coming in every day, because I had designed the layout when we expanded in 2004. I knew which hallway to take to avoid the main elevator. I knew where to wait. Walter was already inside. He had arrived at 10:40 and introduced himself to the receptionist as an attorney attending the meeting as an observer. This is not unusual in deal closings. Nobody thought much of it. You know that feeling when you can sense the whole room is about to shift? When you are standing just outside it and you can feel the change coming, the way you can feel a storm change the pressure in the air? Comment below and tell me where you are watching from. I want to know. The meeting had been going for about 8 minutes when I heard the voice of the lead investor, a man named Gerald Park, cut through the conference room door. He said, "Before we proceed to signature, I need to verify who has legal authority to execute this sale. The company is registered as Callahan Business Services, LLC, and there's a Callahan listed in the articles as the sole member. Is that you?" There was a pause. I could picture Rick's face in that pause. He said something I could not quite make out through the door. Gerald Park said, "The articles of organization on file with the Ohio Secretary of State list a Dorothy Callahan as the sole member and manager of record. Is that you?" I opened the door. I walked in with my cane, and I took the chair at the head of the table, and I sat down. And for a moment, no one said anything at all. Gerald Park looked at me. Then he looked at the window, where the sign above the main entrance was visible through the glass. Callahan Business Services. He looked back at me. He said, "Are you Dorothy Callahan?" I said, "I am. I founded this company 35 years ago. I am the sole member of record, and it is still mine." Walter slid a folder across the table. Inside were the updated Articles of Organization, the operating agreement, the Secretary of State filing dated 6 weeks prior, and a one-page summary from Walter's office confirming that Richard Callahan held a management title with no authority to transfer, sell, or otherwise alienate any asset of the company. Gerald Park opened the folder. He read for approximately 45 seconds. He closed the folder. He looked at Rick, who had not moved. He looked at his two attorneys, who exchanged a glance. He stood up. He said, "I appreciate everyone's time." He picked up his folder, nodded to his associates, and walked out of the conference room. His team followed him. They were in the elevator before the door finished closing behind them. 11 minutes. From the moment Gerald Park asked who had legal authority to the moment the elevator closed was 11 minutes. $2 million gone in 11 minutes, which is less time than it takes to reheat coffee in a microwave. I never mentioned the surgery. I never mentioned that I had been on a gurney while he was sitting in that chair. The name on the window said everything that needed to be said. Rick did not speak for a long time after they left. Diane, who had been sitting to his left, had gone very still. I looked at my son, and I thought about the Sunday dinner and the folder he had slid across the table. I thought about the first time he said I was not in a position to make big decisions. I thought about 9:47 p.m. and the sound of Diane laughing. I thought about carnations. I stood up, picked up my cane, and I went to say goodbye to Carol on my way out. The news that the deal had fallen through moved through the Dayton business community faster than I would have expected. I received calls from 3 long-term partners that week, which I suppose tells you something about how word travels in a mid-sized Ohio city when a $2 million deal collapses in a conference room. I answered the calls. I said very little, which was sufficient. What I also knew, because Rick had not been careful about keeping his personal finances separate from his plans, was that he had made commitments against the anticipated proceeds. He had been counting on a portion of that $2 million to address a debt of approximately $347,000 that had been building for several years. Personal debt, not company debt. His. The company he had planned to use to pay that debt was not his. I want you to understand something. I did not ruin my son. He had built what he built on a foundation that did not belong to him, and when the foundation turned out to be someone else's property, the thing he built came down. That is not something I did to him. That is arithmetic. I called Walter and asked him to come to the house on a Saturday morning. He arrived with coffee from the bakery on Brown Street, which is the kind of detail that tells you how long someone has been in your life. We sat at the kitchen table, the black notebook open beside my cup, and I told him what I wanted to do. I was setting aside a 15% ownership stake in Callahan Business Services for Megan. Megan had been in that waiting room at 6 in the morning. She had driven 40 minutes in the dark so I would not walk into a hospital alone. She was 24 years old, and she had been paying attention to the business for years, in the quiet way that young people pay attention, when they are actually interested, not when they are calculating. She asked about the clients by name. She understood what the work meant to people. She was going to learn what I knew, and one day she was going to know how to carry it. Walter drew up the papers. He brought them to the house the following Thursday. We sat at the same kitchen table, and I signed them. When I was walking back through the parking lot to my car, the door to the building opened, and a little boy came running out through the lobby because someone had not been watching carefully enough, which happens. He was about 5 or 6, with his grandfather's haircut and his grandmother's stubbornness already visible in how he ran. He was Rick's youngest boy, born to Rick's first marriage, and he did not know anything about $2 million or closing dates or conference rooms. He just ran. I watched him run. I thought about 35 years ago, when I was the one running toward something. If you have made it this far with me, I want to ask you something. Does your family know what you have built? Not the dollar amount, not the square footage, what you built, what it cost you, what it is worth to you now. Leave it in the comments. I will be reading. 4 days after that Saturday with Walter, Rick came to the house. It was early evening. I had just made a pot of coffee and I was at the kitchen table with the black notebook, the way I am most evenings. I heard his car in the driveway. I heard him walk to the front door. I heard him stand there for what felt like a very long time before he knocked. I opened the door. He stood on the porch with his coat collar turned up against the cold, and he looked smaller than I was used to seeing him look, which surprised me because he's a large man who takes up a lot of space. He had his hands in his pockets. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." He did not say what he was sorry for specifically. I did not ask him to. Some things do not require itemization to be understood. I looked at him for a moment. He stood there for 3 minutes. I know, because I counted without meaning to, the way you count things when you have spent a lifetime measuring. He stood there in the cold for 3 minutes, and he did not look like a man who was calculating anything. He looked like a man who was tired. I said, "Son, there is still a manager's position at the company, with a salary just like always. You are good at the work when you remember that the work is the point. But the company is mine. That does not change. When you are ready to treat me like a person and not an asset, the door is open." I closed the door. Gently, because I have never slammed a door in my life, and I was not about to start. I stood on my side of it for a moment. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to make this story into something cleaner than it is. I felt the weight of it. I felt the 35 years, and the second mortgage, and the nights I stayed in the office past midnight, and the names of the clients, and Carol, and the sign above the door, and all of it. I felt how much I had built, and how quietly I had held on to it. I went back to the kitchen table. I opened the black notebook to a fresh page. Getting old does not mean getting small. I built this. I planted this. I protected this. I carried it through recessions and bad years and good years, and years that were both at the same time. And I did it alone, and I did it on purpose. And I did it because the work mattered to me in a way that a sale price and a closing date cannot capture. When they thought I was weak enough to take what was mine, they found out that my last name still means something. Because it is mine. It has always been mine. And I wrote that down in the notebook too, on a fresh page, in the handwriting I have had since I was a girl in Dayton, Ohio, sitting at a kitchen table not entirely different from this one. The name on the door has not changed. It will not.